Did you know that Max Factor is credited with coining the term makeup around 1920? Welcome to the Cosmetic Chronicles, the podcast where history meets beauty and tells the amazing stories behind some of the world's most notorious brands. I'm your host, Sarah Carvalho, and I'm a beauty journalist who has been obsessed with makeup since my first swipe of mascara. In this episode, we're covering Max Factor, one of the most prominent names in the beauty industry and one that is most tightly tied to the glamour era of Hollywood in the early 1920s. Now, of course, as always, I have a little bit of a Sarah story, though I will say I have the least amount of experience. Well, I shouldn't say that. So far in everything I've covered on this podcast, Max Factor is what I have the least amount of experience in. As I went through my research, I realized there's kind of a reason for that. It is not as available in the US anymore. So I feel like it wasn't a huge part of my upbringing in the drugstore. And so I feel like I missed out on a lot of the Max Factor of it all. But I did live in London back in 2013 for about a year and a half. And I really count this time as being one of the most formative when it comes to my makeup life. I was always really interested in kind of traditional makeup, but I don't think I'd ever really done a red lip before I lived in London. And when I got there, I was just obsessed with the makeup look I saw everywhere. So it was always a strong black wing. I'm speaking generally, of course, but it was always a strong black wing with a solid red lip. And I just was like, wow, I always thought if you did a strong eye, you couldn't do a strong lip, or, all these rules that I had learned in books and things. And then I got to London and I felt like they just kind of had, I don't know, an extra edge that they didn't really care. It just had a very specific look that I became obsessed with. And one of my friends that I had made during my time there had really nailed the strong black wing and a beautiful red lip. And I remember being like, where did you get your lipstick? Like, what is that? And she told me it was Max Factor, specifically the Lipfinity red lipstick. And I went to their Boots, which is their like kind of a Walgreens CVS. And they have a huge amount of Max Factor there. I was like, what is this brand? And that lipstick is actually, as I found out in this research, one of their many iconic first. It's kind of the lipstick that turned me into a vibrant lippy girl. I am obsessed with a bold lip, and I really credit my time in London, and I guess specifically Max Factor, for beginning my love affair with lipstick, and I haven't looked back since. And we'll obviously talk more about the iconic products later on in the episode, but first, let's go back to the beginning. And as I dive into the history of Max Factor, I do want to give a huge, huge shout out to friend of the pod, one-sided friendship, because I don't think they know who I am, but cosmeticsandskin.com has been such an amazing find for me when I do this podcast. They have such incredible research pieces on so many of these brands, and the Max Factor research that was done is 4 pages of just like deep research. So a lot of my information is coming from cosmeticsandskin.com. Of course, I'm putting all of the links in the show notes for all of my sources, but you'll see that the first 4 are all Cosmetics and Skin because they did the most incredible job as always. So thank you for that. So in case you didn't know, Max Factor is actually a person, and he was born Maximilian Faktorowicz in Lutz, Russia, now part of Poland, back in 1872. He spent 5 years serving in the military as a part of the Russian army, and then he opened a small hair and beauty goods shop in Ryazan, a city about 200 kilometers from Moscow. And while he was running this shop, a theatrical troupe actually passed through town and ended up coming into his shop to buy some cosmetics, which eventually somehow led to Maximilian being employed by the Imperial Russian Grand Opera in the court of Tsar Nicholas. Then as the 1900s began, Maximilian saw where things were headed in Europe. So in February of 1904, Max and his family traveled to America, where they eventually landed in Los Angeles in 1908. And he changed his name from Maximilian Faktorowicz to Max Factor. And by January of 1909, just 3 months after arriving in Los Angeles, Max founded the Max Factor and Company and set up his barbershop called the Antiseptic Hair Store at 1204 South Central Avenue. And this timing actually turned out to be quite kismet for Max because 1908 was actually a really big year for the West Coast. So, in that year, Thomas Edison had set up the Motion Picture Patents Company, or MPPC, which was also known as the Edison Trust. So, it was originally born in New Jersey and it combined most of the major film companies and leading film distributors, along with Eastman Kodak, which was the largest American supplier of film stock at the time. So this was originated, like I said, in New Jersey, but they eventually moved the company west due to the good year-round weather and also a wide range of shooting locations, which eventually helped cement a movie industry in California. So in 1908, they had just moved this company west to Los Angeles, so they were starting to create a film industry, and just a few months later, Max is arriving selling cosmetics, right? So he's coming in at exactly the right time. And so by 1915, Hollywood was a major film production center, and it produced most of the films made in the United States by the 1920s. So since he kind of arrived at the perfect time and had this experience selling cosmetics, he started working directly with the film companies. And his business quickly expanded, and so he ended up having to find a different space because he had basically outgrown his first shop. And he landed in the Pantages building, actually, which I thought was really interesting, before landing in downtown LA in 1916. And this shop on South Hill sold items like hair pieces, dyes, shampoos, brushes, combs, but he also started selling eyeshadow and eyebrow pencils. So this was actually the first time that these products were available outside of the movie industry. And because that was kind of a big deal, he decided he wanted to sell his own products under his own brand name. So in this store, he did stock stage cosmetics from firms, but he decided he wanted to sell his own products under a brand name that would be called the Supreme brand, which included henna shampoo, liquid white, rouge, face powder, eye makeup, cleansing cream, and lip rouge, along with a range of accessories like a face powder brush, for example. And like I said, this was kind of a big deal. This was the first time these products were available to like you and I outside of the movie industry. These were things that were just made in the films. So this was kind of the first step that he saw into connecting the Hollywood glamour with the everyday person. And so as part of the Supreme range, he eventually added a product called grease paint. Now this is probably their first iconic product. And I don't mean iconic in how like I say iconic, where I'm like, it's amazing. But I mean iconic in terms of like this changed the cosmetics industry. This was a first. So this grease paint was a cream rather than a stick, and it was made by mixing pigments into a base of vegetable oils. Now, the reason why this was different than the grease paint people used on film sets is because, like I said, it was a cream instead of a stick. So the stick would be really thick and it would cake up under the lights and it just like wouldn't move, right? But the cream he made was flexible enough to move with facial features. So that really helped overcome the main problems that movie actors had when they had to use stick grease paint in the movies. And in a book called Max Factor, The Man Who Changed the Faces of the World by Fred E. Boston, who was a former publicist for Max, he actually described how this grease paint was made. Quote, as more movie people visited Max's store, he learned that they needed something different from stage makeup, which was much too heavy. Stage makeup had to be applied 1/8 of an inch thick, then powdered. When it dried, it formed a stiff mask and often cracked, which wasn't a problem in the theater where audiences were seated far away from the performers. But on screen, especially in close-ups, it didn't work. Even hairline cracks were visible. What actors needed was a makeup that allowed them to show expression without cracking and something with enough tints to give them a natural look, not a mask, end quote. In an interview with Max in American Cinematographer about this grease paint, he said, quote, it was 1923 that I was able to present to the profession the first flexible makeup that could be applied on the skin very thin and yet retain all of the covering and coloring qualities necessary. I must admit that it was far from perfect, but it was the first and only step ever made to accurately improve theatrical makeup at that time, end quote. So, like I said, iconic, right? This was really a huge deal, and it shifted the way that makeup was done from theater to film. And that will become a theme throughout the rest of the story. And by the 1920s, Hollywood had actually began to install makeup departments on their lots, staffed with specialist makeup artists. So they were starting to take it quite seriously that they needed someone on set who knew how to do makeup. And by 1922, Max Factor was describing his store as the, quote, house of makeup, which suggests that supplying makeup to actors and film studios had become a major part of his business. And as well as providing makeup services to movie stars in the studios, Max Factor also had a research laboratory, and that also comes into play much later. Later in the 1920s, Hollywood boomed with the creation of a bunch of new technologies, like one after the other. Cheaper panchromatic film came in 1926, sound came in 1927, and Technicolor Process 3 film came in 1928. Two of these innovations, specifically the panchromatic and Technicolor film stocks, required the development of a new type of professional makeup. And since Max already had the connections, the expertise, the research laboratory, and the production facilities, they knew that he should be the one to develop and manufacture them.
What are you hiding?
A gift.
For me?
For you, but not for me. From Max Factor.
Oh, Max Factor's new beauty gift.
Try to get ahead of this girl.
Look, Max Factor will give you free this 75-cent size hi-fi lipstick when you buy this wonderful cream puff. I use cream puff and love it. Just a touch of the puff means beauty in seconds. The softest, freshest, loveliest complexion. Only cream puff gives you powder plus an exclusive creamy base. And when you buy cream puff in the special gift offer, you get hi-fi lipstick free.
Good deal, huh?
Wonderful. Intense high-fidelity color that stays on, stays lovely. Plus, beauty in seconds for a complete finished makeup. Both Max Factor's hi-fi lipstick and cream puff are yours for a limited time only. At the regular price of cream puff alone, only $1.25. Love that Max Factor.
In 1927, the Max Factor company decided to really capitalize on the growing acceptance of wearing makeup and decided to introduce its Society makeup range. Now, this range was created as a general cosmetics line, and it was sold nationally across the United States. Some of these products included a face powder, rouge, lipstick, eyeshadow, plus a few skincare ingredients like an astringent cleansing cream, lemon cream, and face bleach, which terrifies me, plus manicure cosmetics, including a cuticle cream, cuticle remover, liquid nail enamel, nail tint, and a nail enamel remover. And so with Max Factor really growing fast, they had to expand their operations. So in 1928, the company actually bought and began renovating the Hollywood Storage Company building on North Highland Avenue. The remodeled building contained over 40,000 square feet of floor space, which they used to include offices, a salon, a lecture room, and then used the rest for manufacturing and packaging. With this Society makeup range, the word makeup was specifically used rather than cosmetics to associate the line with motion pictures and movie stars. So basically, movie stars wore makeup and regular people wore cosmetics. And so they specifically used the word makeup in the name of the line so that they could associate using these products with looking like the screen sirens of the 1920s. One of the features of this Society range, which was also very groundbreaking at the time, was the color harmony principle, which Max Factor considered to be one of the 3 secrets of makeup. So basically, women who were unfamiliar with cosmetics could use these principles to select the appropriate shade of makeup for their particular coloring. So if you have recently gotten your season done or your color matching, this is pretty much where it all started. Almost 100 years ago. So basically, women were divided into 4 main groups based on their hair color. So at the time, people only had 4 hair colors, I guess. It was blonde, brunette, redhead, and brownette, which is a category invented by Max himself. I do not know the difference between a brownette and a brunette, but I'm sure it was something specific. And so what would happen is women could get suggested makeup shades suited to their coloring by filling out a form and sending that form to the company. And then by return mail, they would get some skincare and makeup advice along with a copy of the company booklet that was called The New Art of Society Makeup. And here's a quote from that actual booklet. Quote, "Makeup easy if you learn these secrets. To accomplish this effect is easy if you know what constitutes makeup. If you learn the correct method of makeup, and if you select the correct color harmony to blend with your natural complexion. First, then, makeup requires that each feature which adds to beauty must be considered individually and as part of the harmonious whole. The face, the eyes, the lips, the neck, the arms, the hands, the hair, each should be beautified. Second, makeup should not be used in a haphazard fashion, but should be applied according to certain well-defined principles of art and cosmetic science. Third, all cosmetics used must be in perfect color harmony with the individual complexion, or else they clash, producing an unnatural, grotesque effect, unquote. Grotesque. Later versions of this booklet would actually describe the hair, eye, and skin colors of movie stars who represented each of the 4 types, followed by a list of the Max Factor makeup appropriate for their particular coloring. So what this did was this allowed women to feel like they were exactly emulating the makeup of the movie stars that they perceived as closest to them in coloring, or maybe they would dye their hair so that they could look more like their favorite actress and then could use this makeup to match their look. So aside from just wanting to emulate your favorite glamorous movie star, this was just a smart business marketing decision for Max Factor because the color harmony principle helps sales since it encouraged women to, quote, harmonize their cosmetics, which meant to buy all their makeup from one brand. If you didn't want your colors to clash and you didn't want to look grotesque, then you would look at your, all of the makeup that was appropriate for a brunette and you would know, okay, well, I know all of these go together because they were created that way. So you could just kind of buy everything from one brand. And honestly, this was used not just by Max Factor. Companies like Helena Rubinstein, Elizabeth Arden, and Dorothy Gray had also developed skincare regimens that encourage customers to buy all their skin treatments from that one line. But this was a very interesting and smart marketing move by Max Factor. And a year after releasing their Society makeup range, Max Factor would become even more intertwined with Hollywood and the film industry. So in 1928, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences conducted a series of tests. These tests were known as the Mazda test, and they involved testing lighting, cameras, film, and makeup at Warner Brothers Studios. And during these tests, they actually established incandescent lighting and panchromatic film as the new industry norms. So during these 4 months that the tests were conducted, Max actually developed a makeup that worked well specifically for panchromatic film and incandescent lighting. So this became known as the panchromatic makeup, and it was very quickly adopted by most Hollywood studios, followed by film studios around the world, and eventually was shipped overseas to places in London, Sydney, Shanghai, South Africa, and Toronto. And despite the end of the 1920s and early 30s not going so well for Hollywood because of the, Great Depression and all, Max Factor was actually doing really, really well. The widespread adoption of panchromatic film saw most film studios around the globe having to buy the Max Factor panchromatic makeup. And by 1933, the company was claiming that its professional makeup was being used by 96% of film studios around the world. Hollywood also started figuring out how Max Factor could actually help them with marketing and advertising. It's a two-way street, So to help promote their films while keeping the costs down, again, Great Depression, a number of Hollywood studios actually contracted their actresses to advertise Max Factor products for a nominal fee of $1 in return for Max Factor promoting the actresses and their latest films. So this free advertising was provided to the studios by Max Factor, which enabled Max to closely associate its Society range with Hollywood and to claim that it was, quote, cosmetics of the stars. In 1935, Max Factor introduced the Satin Smooth Liquid Foundation for the film industry, which was essentially a liquid form of the grease paint, and they also came out with matching shades in their Satin Smooth powder. 1936 and 1937 are actually really big years for the Max Factor history. Along with creating the panchromatic makeup that specifically worked with panchromatic film, he also created a makeup specifically for Technicolor film. Pancake makeup was developed to meet specific requirements for Technicolor film. So without corrective makeup to provide a natural complexion, the actors' faces would appear brick red or blue. And so there had to be specific makeup used to film in Technicolor. So that's how he decided to come up with pancake makeup. And it also marked an important step in the move away from grease paint to more modern forms of professional makeup. And so he created this for the actresses, but they started taking large quantities of pancake home with them for their personal use. So Max was like, you know what, maybe this should also be part of my retail situation. And it sold phenomenally well as a professional and as a general makeup. But the important thing about the pancake makeup is that it became the first commercially available foundation. Even with all of these products he was coming out with, it was Pancake that was still the shining star of the bunch, to the point where sales for Pancake actually outnumbered all of the other products that they had combined, and it would continue to grow even beyond the 1930s. But unfortunately, Max died before seeing the full success of this product. He passed away in 1938 at the age of 60.
Fashion goes to your eyes with the most heavenly eye makeup ever created. Exciting new shades of sky blue colors. Fashion's newest from Max Factor. Era blues soft, blues deep, iridescence, azures, all the blues you need to cool the fiery shades of this spring's fashions. You'll wear sky blues by day for excitement. And you'll wear them by night for elegance. Fashion your eyes with Max Factor's Hi-Fi Fluid Liner, Mascara Wand, Eyeliner Pencil, and Cream Eyeshadow, all in heavenly sky blues. Just one part of the wide, colorful I-61 collection by Max Factor.
After Max's death, the family decided that his name should live on, so his son, Francis, actually took on the name Max Factor Jr. He had his father's gift as a creative makeup artist, plus he had worked the closest with his father on product development, so they thought this was a natural step. He became the company's president, while his older brother Davis became the chairman of the board, and the brand continued to grow throughout the Second World War. One of their most popular products during this time was the True Color lipstick, which was developed by Max Factor Jr. The lipstick offered a high degree of indelibility and maintained its true color without irritating the skin. Now, this was wild. It was tested by the kissing machine, which replaced human kissers and applied pressure to artificially kissing lips covered with lipstick to measure how much pressure and kissing the lipstick could withstand and still remain on the lips. I would love to be in the lab the day that this test went down. But despite the success of True Color lipstick, its sales were affected by limitations in supplies and tax increases. And then post-war, the US market became much more of a challenge for the brand. So between more competition and increases in the price of raw materials and labor, Max Factor had to raise their prices in the United States by 10% across the board in October of 1950. But what they found was that the brand expanded largely outside of North America. And that was kind of the thing that was rolling along at the time. So by 1959, they had opened new branches in Australia, South Africa, Argentina, Brazil, Ireland, Italy, Japan, and India. And they also had built new offices and factory space in Toronto. They constructed new factories in France and Mexico City and opened a new factory in Bournemouth, England by the end of the 1950s. So it seemed like while they were also struggling in the US, they were focusing a lot on global expansion. In 1954, they created a new makeup line designed for RCA Victor compatible color television. So again, another trend. There's a new technology. It's time for a new makeup. And the RCA Victor was the broadcast standard used by all major American networks at the time. So they developed this product in collaboration with NBC's color research department. Again, super intertwined with the industry. The product was released to the industry as Max Factor's color TV makeup, and it was offered in the pancake formula, but also in something called the pan stick formula, which was the pancake formula in, you guessed it, a stick form. The following year, the brand launched the Hi-Fi Fluid Makeup and again drew a connection between its innovation and color television, just like it had linked society makeup to motion pictures. However, they were starting to kind of lose endorsement of film and TV stars like they had in the 1920s. Those kind of contracts were starting to dissolve, and so they didn't really have that kind of control anymore. And without the endorsement of the actors and the movie stars, that connection, the campaign really struggled to achieve the same impact as the panchromatic makeup or as the pancake makeup. So as the brand's access to movie star endorsements declined, plus competition from rising cosmetic companies like Revlon, Max Factor focused on strengthening its core expertise in makeup while also expanding into weaker categories. So for them, it was skincare, hair care, the youth market, men's grooming, and fragrance. They expanded their skincare line, so they started to include suggested skincare routines for dry, oily, and normal skin types. And one of their new skincare products included the popular Secret Key, which was a skin toner designed to correct the acid alkaline balance of the skin. They also expanded their makeup range, and there are a few, again, iconic products that I want to talk about here. So the first one is from 1953. It was their release of the Cream Puff makeup, and this is the first ever powder makeup with a cream base. So it was considered an all-in-one blend of creamy makeup base and powder. They had in 1954, they came out with Erase, which was the first concealer offered to the retail trade. And then the mascara wand, which was the first mascara to be applied with a wand from a tube rather than picking the color up from a cake with a brush. And this came out in 1958. So these are three firsts for the entire industry. So the first powder with a cream base, the first concealer offered to the public, and the first mascara to be applied from a tube. And along with this, they also started a youth care line called Pure Magic to challenge this new CoverGirl brand that was coming out. And by 1961, sales and earnings had reached a record high of nearly 63 million US dollars, and this would grow to over 187 million by 1970. And after losing those close ties to Hollywood, Max Factor began reshaping its identity around the idea of being, quote, uniquely Californian. So while not every campaign highlighted California specifically, the name started to appear more frequently in their marketing. So they would start to use them in shades, they use them in advertising copy. They were trying to kind of get across that Californian vibe that also they wanted to respond to that 1960s beauty trend of the natural look, expressive eye makeup, and healthy skin. Now, I'll be here for days if I try to go through all the products and all the different distribution centers and factories that they opened during this time. It's a lot. Like, I'm overwhelmed reading it. So again, go check out Cosmetics and Skin. I'm skipping ahead a few decades because there was a lot that happened that was just a lot of expansion, basically. Long story short, lots of expansion. But there were also a lot of merging and acquisitions and sales that were happening with Max Factor between the late 1960s and the early 1990s. This included a merger with Norton Simon Inc. for about $480 million in stock in 1972. Then in 1976, there were actually no more members of the Factor family as a part of the business. They either retired or they died. So a man named Sam Kalish, who was a Revlon executive, was actually hired to take over the Max Factor division. However, by the time he arrived in 1976, the profit margins had eroded and earnings had declined by almost $20 million. So he only made it in the company about 2 years. Okay, for this next part, feel free to go grab your corkboard and red string because things are about to get a little complicated. So at this point, Max Factor has merged with Norton Simon, right? In 1983, Norton Simon was acquired by S-Mark, which then merged with Beatrice Foods in 1984. Max Factor was then put into the Playtex beauty division of Beatrice Foods. In 1986, Kohlberg, Kravis, Roberts & Company acquired the Beatrice company and sold the Playtex division to an investor group led by Joel E. Smillow. However, to help fund the acquisition of this Playtex division that he just bought, he sold the S-Mark cosmetic brands, Max Factor, Almay, and Halston, to Revlon. Then in 1991, Max Factor was sold to Procter & Gamble for more than $1 billion, and their headquarters were moved to Cincinnati. Then, in 2001, Procter & Gamble discontinued sales of Max Factor in the US due to poor returns and decided to concentrate on promoting CoverGirl instead. A brand, if you remember from our CoverGirl episode, P&G bought in 1988 when they acquired Noxel. Okay, so by 2001, they are a part of Procter & Gamble, but they have decided to discontinue sales of Max Factor in America. However, during this time, the brand was still doing really well, and they were sold in more than 70 countries worldwide, but they withdrew from the US market, citing a limited market share in the region. Then in 2004, one of the world's most influential makeup artists, Pat McGrath, you may have heard of her, was actually signed as Max Factor's global creative design director. And she was there for, it seems, about at least 12 years or so, because in 2016, she actually created a capsule collection for the brand that was specifically made to be as like a reintroduction to the United States. But it didn't really seem to work out very well because later that year, Coty ended up buying Max Factor and CoverGirl from Procter & Gamble, and there now seems to be little to no presence of the brand in the US at all today. I did a little searching, but it was mainly just mascara and like one foundation available at Target.com and some questionable Amazon sellers, but that's it. And I just find that really upsetting considering their deep roots in US makeup history specifically and just our film industry. And I'm not really sure why, if I'm honest. Like I imagine it's because they did spend a lot of time being interwoven so deeply with the studios, and then when the studio system fell apart in the way that it was in the early days of Hollywood, maybe they just didn't know how to recover. I have no idea, but it's sad that we don't have this here. And outside of the US, Max Factor has really actively relaunched and repositioned itself in recent years. They've had new ambassadors, they've done regional collaborations, they've done some social purpose partnerships with like UNICEF, for example. And actually in the fiscal year 2023, Coty reported that its consumer beauty division, which includes Max Factor, achieved a reported revenue growth of 5%. And within the statement from Coty, it's actually mentioned that Max Factor's Miracle Pure foundation was part of this growth. But in last week's beauty bulletin, I did mention how Coty was currently performing a strategic review of its mass market beauty brands and is considering selling off these brands like Max Factor, like CoverGirl. So we'll see if Max Factor changes hands once again. Who knows if he goes to a new home? And if they do, let's just ask to bring them back to the US. And here's a quote from Max. This was from his article, Makeup, for Encyclopedia Britannica's 14th edition. He said, quote, "As a corrective art, makeup serves to 1, cover blemishes, 2, provide the face with a smooth and even color tone for the most effective photography, 3, clearly define the facial features for more visibly expressive action, 4, make the player appear more attractive, and 5, ensure a uniform appearance before the camera. As a creative art, makeup enables the player to take on the appearance of almost any type of character. It can be his means of achieving a distinctive screen personality."
Who was the first man to be honored by the film industry for creating a makeup? Max Factor. The man behind the glamorous faces of Marlene Dietrich, Myrna Loy, and Vivian Leigh. Today, Max Factor's genius goes on with new Light and Natural. Max Factor's first water-based makeup with a biocollagen complex. It covers imperfections and gives you a finish this flawless, this natural. With Light and Natural, the glamour goes on. Thanks, Max.
All right, this week's rabbit hole is brief but weird. This is your first time listening. My rabbit hole of the week is basically something that happens every time I sit down to do research on one of these brands. I always end up down a rabbit hole. So these always happen organically, though I know it will happen, but what it will be is always a surprise. So yeah, this week's rabbit hole is a little weird. So I kind of glossed over Max's early death, because this is how it was written when I saw it on Cosmetics and Skin, and I knew that I would need more information. So this is exactly what it says on the site. Quote, "His death in 1938, possibly brought on by the injuries he sustained when hit by a delivery truck, combined with the stress of a death threat he received while traveling in Italy in 1938 to visit the newly opened Cinecittà Studios, meant that the company passed into the hands of the next generation, end quote. Like, what? Like, hold on. I needed to break this down. He was hit by a delivery truck. He then received a death threat in Italy and then died in his home in Beverly Hills. Like, I was like, wait, whoa. Like, it was such a brief note. And so obviously I had to dig a little bit. Now, I could not find a specific report about this delivery truck accident. So I can't like confirm exactly what happened. But when I read other sites talking about this without any citation specific to it, they mention this accident and say that it was during this time that Frank, his son, started becoming more involved with product development, including working on his father's True Color lipsticks. But I couldn't seem to find anything that said it about this incident. And actually, the only accident report I found was from 1936. So it was 2 years before he died. And what I found was a photo of Max on the phone after he finds out that his wife had been in a critical car accident. So apparently this photograph appeared alongside the article Crash Hurts Mrs. Factor from the Los Angeles Times. So I don't know if things got confused over the years and maybe she was injured and he wanted to take time with her. Like, I don't know, but that was the only thing I found. And then when it comes to the death threat, I found an article by John Updike from The New Yorker that was titled Makeup and Make-Believe, where he mentions that while Max was in Europe with his son Davis, pursuing some possibilities, he received a death threat, modestly demanding $200 or else, that unnerved him and prompted him to return home. But I also saw another piece that stated it was during a stopover in Paris where he received a note demanding money in exchange for his life. And an attempt was actually made by the police to use a decoy to capture the extortionist, but no one turned up to the agreed drop-off point to collect the money. But Max was so shaken up by the threat that he returned to the US, and when he got there, he took to his bed and then eventually died. Either way, all of this appears to have taken a toll on Max, and he succumbed to what I assume is a stress-induced illness. And I just found this whole thing to be interesting because it was such a strange turn of events, or just stack of events that were happening, and also just leading to him passing away way too young. I felt like he still had so much more to give, but that being said, what he left behind completely changed the cosmetics industry forever. And I was sad to see that this is how it ended for him in such a stressful fashion. And I'll end this rabbit hole with a quote from that John Updike New Yorker piece and how Max had an impact on beauty and how females used his products to finally begin to express themselves. For the sake of love, broadly speaking, American women in the early 20th century, overcoming Puritan scruples enforced by male employers, husbands, editorial writers, and legislators. In Kansas in 1915, a law was proposed making it illegal for women under the age of 44 to wear cosmetics, quote, for the purpose of creating a false impression, end quote, began to paint themselves. Movies enhanced by Max Factor makeup were not alone to blame, but they did help legitimize artifice and its false impressions. Their heightened images spoke to women of an attainable, better self. As I remember it, years ago, a scientific study, which electronically tracked eyeball movement, demonstrated that during the showing of a motion picture, the eyes of the men in the audience followed the women on the screen, but so did the eyes of the women, end quote. All right, let's quickly run through the icons. So we talked about most of them already, but I wanted to specifically talk about Pan Stick, which was the pancake makeup in stick form. And this was created in 1947 specifically, but it's actually still a best-selling product for them today. I also want to talk about the Lipfinity lipstick. This was my first introduction into the Max Factor brand, and this was actually created in the year 2000. They introduced a 12-hour long-lasting non-transfer lip color. And between 2006 and 2008, one was sold every 9 seconds globally. Another icon that is still available to this day is their cult classic mascara, which is the False Lash Effect Mascara. And this mascara is known for doubling the thickness of lashes thanks to their very specific liquid lash formula. And then a solid, bold brush, not solid, but like a good bold brush that coats every single lash. And they also have the 2000 calorie mascara, which apparently is a makeup artist's favorite, and it promises up to 300% more volume than your bare lashes. This is also still a bestseller for them, and with that kind of promise, I'm going to need to try it. Also still available today is the Cream Puff Powder. So this product is medium to high coverage with a super fine matte finish. And again, it was known for being the very first formula that had a cream base to a powder product. And the last one I wanted to talk about was the lip pomade, which eventually became known as the lip gloss. Now, today they have a few different lip glosses, which are different than their original pomade, which came in a little tin. But the story behind this is interesting because, well, Max Factor is actually the one who invented lip gloss. He created this lip pomade in 1930, and he wanted to create something that would make lips shiny and glossy for films, especially with actresses starring in black and white films. He wanted to make sure their lips are really shiny. And women were inspired by movie actresses to embrace this makeup trend, which led to the popularity of lip gloss. And the first commercially available lip gloss ever, again, a first, was Max Factor's X-Rated, which was launched in 1932. And that original formula was actually sold all the way up until 2003. Ending with some fun facts that I found about Max. There was actually a lot. The first fun fact I found is that Max Factor made a number of contributions to the American war effort, including manufacturing camouflage makeup for the U.S. Marine Corps. The brand also supplied the copper green makeup that Margaret Hamilton wore as the Wicked Witch of the West in The Wizard of Oz. In 1980, the Japanese branch of Max Factor acquired rights to a yeast-based substance called Patera and included it in that Secret Key product. And they renamed the product Max Factor SK2. And in 1995, Procter & Gamble would actually take that product, dump the Max Factor name, and expand it into the SK2 prestige cosmetic brand we know today. In 1984, the Max Factor Museum opened in the former Max Factor Hollywood Makeup Studio at North Highland Avenue and later became the Hollywood Museum in 2003. And it appears to still be open today. And I think they kept a lot of what the studio looked like and some of the old products. So I'm definitely adding that to the list next time I'm in LA. And lastly, Max Factor, the man, was given a special award by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in 1928 for his achievements in makeup. And I'll end this episode with a quote from Max himself about how he transitioned from working on only movie actors to creating products for everyone. All my attention went to their individual needs by showing them how to enhance their good points and conceal the less good. So those were the Chronicles of Max Factor. Let me know your thoughts. What do you think of the brand? If you're not in the United States, is Max Factor like a staple in your store? Have you been using Max Factor for years? I would just love to know someone else's experience with Max Factor. If you're in the US, did you have any experience with the brand before it got pulled? You gotta let me know these things. Leave me a comment. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks for tuning in, and also feel free to share some of the brands that you'd like to see covered on this podcast. I'll see you next time on the Cosmetic Chronicles.